There is instability in the electricity grid, forcing the market operator to step in on a daily basis. And the stopgap measures used to bring stability are costly. According to the Energy Market Commission's latest grid performance report, the instability is caused by rapid change in the power system's mix of generation, increasing renewables and decreasing coal. And for more on this, we're joined from Melbourne by Director of the Grattan Institute's Energy Program, Tony Wood. Thanks for joining us, Tony.
Good afternoon.
The statements today from the Australian Energy Market Commission, what were they trying to say?
Well, they're trying to get on top of something that the Market Commission and the market operator have fallen behind on the last couple of years, and largely the reason for that is because we've seen a combination of, I guess, absent or very poorly structured policy. What that's done is push, for example, a large quantity of wind farms into South Australia. About almost 40 or 50% of the electricity at one time is wind farms. Now that's fine if we want to reduce emissions and it produces the electricity. But wind farms don't have what's called the same huge spinning mass of a large coal or gas-fired power station. So when all that wind is running at the same time, what happens is that the system potentially is unstable or subject to very simple shocks if things go wrong. So what happens then, the market operator has to step in quite regularly and back off the wind and say, we can't produce all this wind, can't deal with it, you better run some of those gas plants. So that sort of means that the sort of thing we're seeing in this report is happening. Now, there's things we can do about it from an engineering perspective, and those things are starting to happen now. But in the meantime, the market operator does need to step in those times. It's annoying. It's frustrating, it's necessary, it's the right thing to do, and it does cost a bit of money in the short term.
So, Tony, it's kind of, I guess the narrative today was this is all the fault of renewables. Is it, although some things it was about renewables coming in and coal going out, is the problem that the system was built for one particular power and can't deal with a new? Is it, is it possible to change the system, or is this a fault of renewables?
No, of course, it is absolutely possible to change the system. If you get one thing out of whack ahead of another thing, in this case that's what's happened, because these things have happened so quickly and the cost of renewables has come down so quickly, that's the other surprising thing. You do get this sort of disconnect between what's going on and what should be going on. Now, there are many technical and engineering solutions to these problems. Some of them are being implemented as we speak, and very shortly we'll start to see that stability be reapplied. In the meantime, the intervention we're seeing is necessary. It's not causing instability in the grid. I mean, the power's still on, the lights are still on, the system is not falling apart, and we are, dealing with this. Of course, the other thing that's happening is we are seeing the problem of old age and hot weather. They don't go well together, and if you're an old power station like a coal power station, you start to creak a bit. And we also saw that happening in summer as well, and that also contributed to the sort of problems that the market's having.
It's interesting that, because I think Neil Mitchell today was quite passionate about the fact that some people in Victoria have been charged part of the reliability and emergency reserve trade there, and they'd been charged extra on their bill for that. That, in some cases, was because coal power had broken down basically, and yet again that was kind of being seen as a renewables problem. I mean, again, is it a mixture of problems essentially?
Well, it's a mixture of the problems, and of course the root cause of this is, once again, our incapacity to have stable climate policy over a long time to drive the sort of investment we need. If we get that right, then we do get the right combination of coal or gas or wind or solar and storage and all those things that come together and make the system work. When you don't do it right, then you get this sort of problem, and you get disconnected, incoherent policy across both Commonwealth and state governments who are then forced to step in and do stuff. That's when you get the sort of problems we're talking about.
Well, that was one of the complaints of the Energy Commission, was talking about the fact that the problem is we've got a lot of solar coming on from people making their own decision to put solar on, and we've got in every state a different policy there. I mean, Malcolm Farrar, it's almost as if we should have some kind of national energy guarantee or something. Oh, I'm not sure. Could you come up with something?
Or a carbon price or something like that. Look, would a question about the problem itself, you've given one solution which has changed the structure of the market, essentially. Would you accept leaving the market structure as it is and building more coal-fired power stations to fit in with it better?
Well, I think, I don't have any problem with a mix of coal-fired power stations as being necessary to maintain the system as we move forward. The trick is to make sure that we do that in a way that still meets our emissions reduction. And so the better answer, I suspect, is because in 30 years' time, it will be very difficult to have coal-fired power stations in our system and meet the sort of emissions reduction that we are told we need to achieve. So if we accept that, then that makes no sense to invest in things that are supposed to last for 30 or 40 years. So in the medium term to short term, the better things are put in place the stability we need, maintain some of those newer coal plants we've already got for a while yet, while we need to make sure we retain stability of the system, plan for the exit of coal, do it properly, deal with the communities that are going to be affected by it, and plan properly and put the policies in place. Now, that doesn't mean fundamentally putting in new market structures. The structure from the market will work okay, but if you don't give the market the right pricing signals and the right policy, don't be surprised if it doesn't deliver what you want either.
Is this the problem, though, that it's essentially this debate, it's a technical debate, it's been caught in the political debate, Susan, do you think? I mean, we've seen that essentially one side yells, build a coal power station, one side yells, build a, solar wind farm, and, we get caught in that.
And look, I get very reassured when I listen to Tony point out that the solutions are there. All the technology, all of the capacity to solve the problem exist, but they have not been brought together. And that's been a failure of national policy. And we have not had a national energy policy. I hope we get one very soon. But if you look at it at the other end, I'm worrying about the very poor people in Australia who are just getting a one-off $70 to help pay for their electricity. What are they to make of all this?
Well,
that's the other end of the story.
It's interesting to say that because Barnaby Joyce wrote a column today and he talked about the fact, and he did attack you, Malcolm Farr, he talked about the fact that this is about, an issue of human rights and about people who can't afford to get the power. And he said it came down to solar panels on inner city houses. Now, the interesting thing about that is that the top 3 postcodes for solar power on your rooftop are Bundaberg, Hervey Bay and Toowoomba, which are all National Party heartland. I mean,
that's right.
Greg, is there an interesting kind of mismatch here that the political debate is, at the top level, but it doesn't match the facts underneath?
So I'd have a slightly different view of it, really. I think both sides of politics have performed catastrophically in energy policy.
I think we'd all agree on that.
Yeah, I do think renewables are a big part of the problem. They're not as cheap as people say, or they wouldn't need subsidies, and they're not reliable. Now, of course, you can fix the problem if you're prepared to spend enough money. But we've gone from being a low-price energy country to being a very high-price energy country. At the moment, we're an affluent country because we sell so much iron ore and coal, but we're not building industries. I think our emission reduction targets are overly ambitious. We have one of the highest population increases in the developed world, which I totally support. I'm a big immigration person, and as a result we've had some of the biggest per capita emission reductions in the developed world. I don't think there's any benefit in destroying our manufacturing industry, what's left of it, in order to prove our virtue in this area and imposing on ourselves prohibitive energy costs. But one approach might work or another approach might work, but what both sides of politics have done over the last 12 years is veto each other's approaches.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll get something more coherent after the next election.
Tony, do you agree? Greg, do you think that the price increases are a reflection of because of the shift to renewables? I mean, it tends to be a kind of mixture of poles and wires. Some is distribution, some is actual. Where is the price increase coming from?
Look, there's been 2 major effects over the last 10 years. The first 5 years were due to extraordinary over-expenditure in the poles and wires, brought by very bad forecasting. People thought the energy was growing and energy consumption was falling. And so we ended up with a real mess. That was the one that's commonly called gold plating. And we haven't done anything about that. The second one was that what people didn't see happening was what was going to occur when 3 things occurred all at the same time. That is, we saw the closure of old, really low-cost coal-fired power stations. Secondly, we saw coal prices increasing. And thirdly, we saw gas prices increasing. And it's been by overwhelmingly the increases in the cost of gas and coal and the fact that the coal and gas plants we have, the more expensive ones, then start running harder to replace the cheap ones that close. They are the main reasons for the higher wholesale costs that are passing through to prices. Much, much less so the renewable energy, which does have an impact, but it's certainly nothing like the impact of those factors.
Well, one response you could have to that, of course, would be, as Malcolm Turnbull suggested, to build a really high-tech coal-fired power plant which got the maximum energy for the minimum possible emissions, or to build, to explore for some gas, not to have a moratorium on gas exploration all over Australia, thereby ensuring that you don't get even conventional gas supplies coming along. I mean, the US has, until this year, generally speaking, reduced its emissions, and that has been by substituting gas for coal, because they explore for and produce a lot of gas. Our politics has made it impossible for us to produce gas in most of our country.
But our politics is also why our land is in the state that it's in. We have 12 years to turn this ship around. Like I'm hearing what you're saying about Australia is currently an affluent country because of these things, but our rivers are running dry. Our children are taking to the streets to demonstrate the leadership that we're not seeing from the politicians. I have a lot of friends who are very low income households, and when we were renting, we were very fortunate to rent in a house that had solar. Our electricity bill was far more manageable as poor university students when our electricity was solar, because the cost is significantly lowered. We don't have to consider the vulnerable of our nation going without heating and cooling as what's going to happen if we move away from coal. We have excellent opportunities for renewals here, and if we're going to keep pushing this neoliberal idea that everyone's responsible for their own impact on the land, then we're going to have problems with the grid, because we're seeing people putting solar on their own homes. We need the leadership. We need to change. Because what we're doing is destroying the land, literally.
Well, I think we can all agree on lack of leadership. I think that's the only point we actually agreed on there. We'll have to, unfortunately, move on from that. Thanks to our guest, Director of the Energy Program at Grattan Institute, Tony Wood. Thanks for joining us. Well, over the last few decades, a block of small but powerful conservative